The air was thick with the smell of damp wood as I stepped into the cold, dark attic. My mother had told me to clean it up to make the house livable again. The cottage had been in my father's family for generations, but now that he was gone, it felt like a tomb. The village of Widow's Hollow had always been an eerie place, haunted by rumors and superstition, but it was home now. I didn't know what else to do. The sudden death of my father had left a wound too deep to heal, and my mother, consumed with grief, had become distant. It was as if the life had been sucked out of her, leaving her a hollow shell. As I rifled through boxes of old trinkets and forgotten memories, something caught my eye. At the back of the attic, nearly hidden behind a stack of dusty crates, was an old wooden chest. It was small, intricately carved, and looked out of place in a room full of old books and cobwebs. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, nestled among a pile of faded fabric and broken toys, was a porcelain doll. It was beautiful and strange, with pale skin, dark, piercing eyes, and lips that seemed to curl into a faint, knowing smile. Its dress was old-fashioned, frayed at the edges, but still carefully stitched. I felt an odd sense of foreboding as I held the doll in my hands. The longer I looked at it, the more I felt like it was watching me, its eyes seeming to follow my every movement. But I dismissed it as nothing more than my imagination. I brought the doll downstairs, showing it to my mother, hoping for some reaction, some sign of approval. But she only glanced at it for a moment before nodding. "It's lovely," she said, her voice distant, as if she weren't fully there. "You can keep it if you want." I wasn't sure why, but I felt an immediate attachment to the doll. I set it on my nightstand that evening, convinced it would keep me company in the quiet house. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The doll's dark eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, watching me, waiting. The days passed, and the feeling of unease only grew. I found myself talking to the doll, telling it things I never told anyone else. Secrets, fears, thoughts that I couldn't express to my mother or anyone in the village. It felt like the doll understood me, like it was listening. And then, one day, I caught myself laughing with the doll. I didn't know why, but it felt comforting, like a strange, twisted friend. At first, my mother didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she didn't care. But as the days wore on, I saw the change in her. She started to watch me more closely, her eyes filled with concern, but she never said anything. She would occasionally glance at the doll, her expression unreadable. I wondered if she felt the same unease I did, or if it was just me. Then I started drawing. I had always enjoyed art, but now it seemed like the only thing that made sense. My drawings were all the same. The doll, I drew it standing in the corner of my room, on the porch, even by the window. But then one night, I drew it somewhere else. My mother's bedroom. The doll was standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her as she slept. When I showed her the drawing the next morning, she paled. Her hands trembled as she took the piece of paper from me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "Ellie," she said, her voice shaking, "where did you get this idea?" I didn't understand her reaction. It was just a drawing, after all. But as she walked away, I noticed something strange. The doll, which I had left on my nightstand, was now gone. I searched the room frantically and finally found it in my mother's bedroom, lying on the floor by her bed. That night, something happened. I woke up to find my arms covered in scratches, thin red lines that hadn't been there before. I couldn't remember how they got there. I hadn't felt anything, no pain, no sensation. But the marks were unmistakable, and the doll was gone again. The next few days were a blur of strange occurrences. I would wake up to find the doll in places I hadn't put it. On the kitchen table, in the hallway, once even sitting on the front porch. I tried to tell my mother, but she dismissed it. "You must be moving it yourself without realizing it," she said, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew something was wrong, just like I did. One night, I woke to find myself standing in front of the door. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was in some sort of trance, my hands gripping the doorknob as I muttered something under my breath. My mother rushed to me, shaking me, but I could only repeat the same words. "The widow is waiting." That's when I decided to do some research. I needed to know what was happening. The village's history was full of dark tales, but one story stood out. It was about a woman, a widow, who had lost her husband in a tragic accident. She had been left alone in the cottage, consumed by grief. Desperate to keep her husband with her, she had turned to dark forces, using a porcelain doll as a vessel for his spirit. But it didn't work. Her soul, torn between the living and the dead, became trapped in the doll. The villagers claimed that the widow's spirit still haunted Widow's Hollow, her restless soul seeking new victims to claim. I couldn't believe it, but as the days went on, I could feel the presence of the widow growing stronger. I began to hear whispers in the dead of night, faint voices calling my name. The doll was always near, always watching. I couldn't escape it. In a panic, my mother decided to get rid of the doll. She threw it into the fire one night, hoping to end whatever curse had taken hold of our home. But as the flames roared, something terrible happened. I screamed in terror, begging her to stop. "Don't burn it," I cried. "Please, don't burn it." The fire blazed hotter, but my mother didn't stop. She pushed the doll deeper into the flames, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But when I woke the next morning, the doll was sitting on my nightstand, untouched by the flames. And I was alone. My mother was gone. There was only a note left behind. "The widow is waiting for me." The curse had been completed. Widow's Hollow had claimed another soul. And the doll was mine now. The moment we arrived at the cottage, I felt an odd sense of peace. It was exactly what I needed. An escape from the bustling city, the constant noise, the frantic rush of modern life. Jason, ever the supportive partner, was happy to indulge me. We'd spent so many years talking about moving away from everything, and here we were at last. The cottage stood on the edge of the Scottish Highlands, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine. The place was almost too perfect, like something out of a dream. The cottage had once belonged to my late aunt, a renowned artist who had lived here for as long as I could remember. She was eccentric, almost to the point of obsession with her art. The walls of her home were covered in sculptures that seemed to watch you wherever you went. Faces carved from wood, twisted forms of metal, and stone figures that gave off an unsettling energy. My aunt had always been a bit different. We hadn't spoken much in the last few years of her life, but when I received news of her passing, it hit me hard. In a strange way, this cottage felt like the last piece of her, something tangible I could hold on to. The first few days were peaceful. Jason and I unpacked our things, set up a small art studio for me, and enjoyed the quiet serenity of the place. The attic, however, was a different story. It was filled with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten relics from my aunt's life. That's where I found it. The doll. It was sitting on an old wooden chair, half hidden behind a pile of old paintings. At first, I thought it was just another one of my aunt's creations, but as I lifted it into my hands, I felt a chill run down my spine. The doll was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its skin was made of old, cracked porcelain, yellowed with age. Its hair was matted and thin, barely recognizable as once being a fine shade of brown. But the eyes were the most disturbing feature. They were glassy and lifeless, yet somehow they seemed to follow my every movement. I couldn't explain it, but I felt watched. It was as though the doll was alive, its gaze fixed on me with an almost unnatural intensity. Despite the unease it stirred in me, I couldn't resist the urge to study it more closely. As an artist, I was fascinated by the intricate craftsmanship, the detail in every stitch of its faded clothes, and the eerie perfection of its lifeless face. I decided to place the doll on a shelf in my studio. I wanted to paint it, capture its unnerving presence on canvas. Jason, always a skeptic, dismissed my concerns, laughing off my unease. "It's just an old doll," he said, as he carried the rest of the boxes inside. That night, as I sat in my studio sketching the doll, I began to feel something strange in the air. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crept through the room. The light overhead flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I shivered, but told myself it was just the wind, the house settling. But then I heard it. Faint whispers, like the sound of someone speaking just out of earshot. I turned quickly, expecting to see Jason, or maybe the wind blowing through cracks in the walls. But there was no one there, only the doll, sitting motionless on its shelf. The next day, Jason and I woke to something even more unsettling. The doll had moved. It was no longer perched on the shelf where I had left it. Instead, it sat on the floor, its head tilted toward Jason, its eyes locked on him. A cold sweat broke out on my skin as I stared at the doll. "Did you move it?" I asked Jason, but he only shook his head, equally puzzled. We both dismissed it, chalking it up to our imaginations. Maybe we had bumped it while unpacking. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. As the day wore on, more strange things began to happen. I was in my studio, working on a new painting, when I noticed something in the corner of my eye, a drawing pinned to the wall. It wasn't mine. In fact, it looked like something I had never seen before. I went over to examine it, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a crude, distorted sketch of the doll, its face drawn with jagged lines, its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. But what made my blood run cold was the figure behind it, an outline of a woman shackled in chains. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face contorted in terror. My breath caught in my throat. The image seemed so real, so vivid, that I could almost feel the woman's pain, as if the drawing had captured something far beyond art. That night, I had a dream. My aunt was there, standing in a darkened room. Her face was pale, her expression grave. She held the doll in her hands, and her voice echoed through the dream, clear and sharp. "It's cursed," she said, her words sending a shiver down my spine. "And it has chosen you." I woke up with a start, my heart racing. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the window. The air was thick, heavy with an almost suffocating presence. I turned to look at the shelf where the doll had been, and my stomach dropped. It was gone. I shot out of bed and rushed to the studio, Jason following closely behind. There on the floor, the doll sat once again, its eyes gleaming with what could only be described as malicious intent. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This was no longer just a strange occurrence. It was something far darker, something I couldn't explain. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Jason and I decided to call in a local historian, hoping to learn more about the doll and its origins. What he told us made my blood run cold. The doll, it seemed, had once been part of a collection owned by a notorious occultist. Its previous owners had all met untimely, violent deaths. It was said that the doll was cursed, bound to a dark force that fed on the souls of those who came into contact with it. We tried to leave the cottage, to escape whatever force was trapping us here, but the doors wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut, as though some invisible force was keeping us inside. Panic set in. Desperation clawed at my chest as I realized we were trapped, unable to escape the grip of the doll and whatever dark force it commanded. In a moment of sheer terror, I took the doll and threw it into the fireplace. As the flames licked at its porcelain skin, the room trembled and the whispering voices grew louder, filling the room with an oppressive weight. Jason tried to pull me away, but I couldn't stop. The doll had to be destroyed. The flames grew higher, engulfing it completely. But just as I thought it was over, the whispering reached a deafening crescendo, and then silence. By morning, everything had changed. The cottage was eerily still, the air thick with an unnatural heaviness. The doll was gone, as if it had never been there. But so was I. I vanished without a trace, as though swallowed whole by the darkness that had claimed me. Jason searched for me, his frantic calls echoing through the empty cottage, but there was no sign of me. Some say my spirit is still there, trapped within the doll, seeking a new host of torment, a new victim to claim. And sometimes, if you listen closely in the stillness of the night, you can hear the faint whispering of a voice calling your name.